before we obtain the fruit from every plant, we first got to cover some ground. Excuse the beeping in the background. I got some construction going on. So here I was looking up Civil War monuments in Madison Parish, Northeast Louisiana, where the maps show that Civil War battles took place at. And a bunch of these monuments popped up. So we need to get a clear understanding of what we're looking at. And basically where Europeans got the idea to make these monuments or memorials and place somebody standing on some kind of platform, standing up basically in elevation. And to do that, I'm going to go back in a couple of books and then look at some definitions. So here in the book, History of Alabama and incidentally that of Georgia, Mississippi from the earliest period by Albert J. Pickett, 1851, it states that a chief, Tuscaloosa, down in Alabama, it says was found as a proud Mobilian seated upon two cushions placed on a large and elegant matting upon an eminence which commanded a delightful prospect. Pause. So he was seated upon an eminence. What's an eminence? It says a piece of rising ground, elevation, rise, rising, raised ground, height, hill, bank, mound. So he was on a mound. It says right here that commanded a delightful prospect. It says right here that prospect means an extensive view of landscape. Goes on to say view, vista, vista. Now when you see the word vista, you know what it's referring to. Outlook, perspective, scene, scenery. So in order to have a view or see the scenery, you have to be up high. Now here I found in a book called Footprints of Vanished Races in the Mississippi Valley, being an account of some of the monuments and relics of prehistoric races scattered over its surface and suggestions as to their origin and uses by A.J. Cunnett, 1879. Here in that book, it says, although nearly all the accounts of the expeditions of the earlier explorers of the continent of North America contain notes of striking memorials. So the people that came, the very first expeditions, their notes contained a bunch of stories and details about striking memorials that were here in the Americas. So let's go look at the definition of what a memorial is. The definition for memorial is something, especially a structure established to remind people of a person or event. So it says the notes contain striking memorials which were met with in their journeys, such as mounds, embankments, fortifications, and the like. So it says right here, goes on to say all such notices were too meager and superficial to give them any special scientific value. They did get scientific value, just not exposed to us, right? It says through the labors of the American Antiquarian Society, the intention of the scientific world was first called to the countless and often imposing memorials of prehistoric America, and their proper study began. Pause. But as far as the study of all those memorials beginning with the American Antiquarian Society, it says here that it was incorporated by the Act of Legislature of Massachusetts in October of 1812. But we know that the War of 1812 had just started or was just going to begin at that time, which wouldn't allow the Antiquarian Society to do any real studying in a lot of the memorials in a lot of different parts of particularly West, Southwest, and Southeast United States. So they developed this thing in Massachusetts in 1812. If you go look at the wars, you'll see that the Revolutionary War took place basically ended in the 1780s, and then after that you had a bunch of Indian massacres that was exchanged between Indian on settler and settler on Indian, especially in those areas. And then when you go look at the battles map of the Civil War, you'll see that those areas up there had no battles in them during that Civil War. But back down here it says that the countless and often imposing memorials of prehistoric America. It's letting us know right now that all these memorials with these Europeans, mostly ones memorialized for basically being a slaughterer of our ancestors, pretty much. So all these memorials, though, are replicas. And here we have one right here in Madison Parish Confederate Monument in Tallulah, Louisiana, where this guy is standing about 10 to 15 feet in the air on the monument or memorial, or their version of an eminent. Here we have one right here with all these flags in it. It says of the Benjamin Franklin statue in front of the old post office in Washington, D.C. I just wanted to point out how they got him standing way up. But this building also looks like, with all its windows and the way it's built, looks like one of the Indians' palaces. Now, as you look at this, you'll see right here, Ben Hill's got a statue, a monument. Jefferson Davis has one, Benjamin Franklin. And a lot of us, if not all of us, have these same last names. Some of us have Davis, Hill, Franklin, and what have you as a last name. So the way I look at it is they know what we know not. So the came in, slaughtered our people, and then gave us the names, not only us, but the different places, street names, and what have you. Gave that the names of those people who were responsible for slaughtering our relatives, our ancestors. And that there's a cold, hard fact. But if you look down here at this Antietam National Cemetery right here, see how that monument is up on a mound? See, the line of it starts right here. Goes up. Monroe County, West Virginia has a Confederate monument with a guy standing way up there. Yet when you go do the research, you'll see that West Virginia did not want to secede from the Union, so they didn't get involved or something like that, it says. So here they have a Confederate Soldiers of Monroe County in West Virginia monument. Here's one, Shiloh Battlefield. Remember the one in Tennessee? They have this tall monument right here with a man standing up there, Confederate. This tall one right here looks like one of those pillars with a man standing up on it. That's in New Orleans. Here we have a pyramid made of stone. Says it's a memorial of the fallen Southern soldiers of the Civil War. Here's another gigantic one right here in Augustus. Says Augustus Confederate Monument. You look at their replicated eminence. Here's another monument up on a mound right there. Here's another one with a mound in the background right here. This one right here, I believe, is the one in New Orleans, is on a mound complex. As you look at the way the ground is formed, how it goes up with levels like wide steps, very wide, like 4 or 5 foot surfaced steps. And you see, this is all a mound that they have these cannons on right here. So now we know where they get the idea for the monuments. There was already memorials here. The great chiefs and things were probably memorialized in their sculptures and things that they had. Now we know. But let's switch gears for a minute and look at these mounds. So we know that after the so-called Civil War in 1873, the Congress passed a law called the Timber Culture Act of 1873. Said many hoped that giving settler colonists deeds to public lands in return for growing trees would reshape the environment of the West. The chronology of the act says in 1873, the Timber Culture Act of 1873 is passed, offering 160 acres of public land to those who would cultivate trees on at least 40 acres of the claim. Then in 1874, the Timber Culture Act is amended, requiring those who made claims to meet the age and citizenship requirements set by the Homestead Act. The amendments also established a schedule for breaking prairie and planting trees on the claim. Then in 1878, 4 years later, the Timber Culture Act is amended again, lowering the required acreage of planted trees from 40 to 10. So they gave the people the land, but they didn't just give it to them. They actually send somebody out there and show them exactly where to plant those trees, of course. And after they had got them planted where they needed them to be planted at, they dropped the acreage on the claim, the requirement, from 40 acres to 10 acres. And the significance behind them in 1873, okay, planting these trees and giving this land to these people that were coming by the boatloads, is that they were planting the trees on the mounds. As you look right here, I looked up, just Googled Indian mounds and then looked at the images. And right here, you see a mound with a bunch of trees on it. Again, right here on the same page, you see a bunch of trees planted on a mound. Again, you see a bunch of trees planted on a mound. Right here. Some more trees planted in a mound complex right here. You see more trees planted on a mound right here, and right here. And all I'm doing is scrolling down the list of Indian mound images. Here's more trees planted at the top of this mound. If you scroll down a little bit, you'll see another mound right here with a bunch of trees planted on it. Again, you see them right here. Bunch of trees planted on mounds. Right back here, right up here, right over here. See all those trees planted on that huge mound complex? See where it's a level there, level here, and then a level up here. But if we stop and go back to that article on the Timber Culture Act and look at this picture of a tree claim in Lyon County in 1900, if you look closely, you can see that there's a pathway cut through a mound. See right there as it goes up. Then on the other side, it's right here coming down. See the mound there? More trees on mounds. As you can see right here, these trees planted in this bushel of Indian mounds. You go over a little bit, there's some more trees right here planted on mounds. See these trees right back here planted on mounds, or disguising them. They're not always necessarily planted on the mound. They could be around it where you can't see. You'll see a thick bushel of trees, but you can't see the ground behind it. More than likely there's a mound back there, Indian mound. Now remember the significance behind the mounds. Here in the Antiquities of Tennessee book from the 1800s, it says that the mortuary remains were placed in cyst or box-shaped graves built of stone slabs and sometimes constructed with much care. 100 or more of these rude sarcophagi are occasionally found deposited in several tiers or layers in a single burial mound. So one mound could have 100 or more skeleton remains in it. And again, if we look right here, there's more trees planted on mounds right here. On this episode, it's going to be part 3 to Indian DNA. In previous parts, we learned that our ancestors are buried all over the place in mounds, and most of where they're at has been put on conservation and preservation by the government, or either built on by different government and private structures. So I'm going to go in here into the Antiquities of Tennessee, the book, and read a little about how they were buried in the mound. So it says the prehistoric cemeteries of the stone grave race of Tennessee are among the most interesting memorials of the Aboriginal life in America. The mortuary remains were placed in cyst or box-shaped graves built of stone slabs. Pause. So the Indians dealt with stone really well. Stone slabs is not something that people deal with their hands today. They use machines, but back then the Indians used their hands. That's why they were all athletic. They believed in using their physical abilities. Goes on to say, and sometimes constructed with much care. 100 or more of these rude sarcophagi are occasionally found deposited in several tiers or layers in a single burial mound. Pause. So when we look at a mound, a lot of times, because of how we're been accustomed to think of burials and cemeteries, we'll look at it and believe there's only 1 or 2 people buried in it, when it says right here 100 or more are occasionally found deposited in several tiers or layers in a single burial mound. So these mounds would be huge sometimes, and evidently they could contain anywhere from 100 or more. Says one of the largest and richest of these Aboriginal cemeteries, about 5 miles south of Nashville, lying along the waters of Browns Creek and in the midst of the historic battlefield, has recently been explored. In fact, devastated by relic hunters and collectors. It is situated upon the farm of Mr. O.F. Noel, adjoining Glendale Park, between the Franklin and the Middle Franklin turnpikes, and in one of the most fertile, well-watered, and beautiful sections of Tennessee. Upon this favored site, centuries ago, there was a large town or city. Pause. All these books lie. So when it says centuries ago, don't believe that. That people just don't go away like that. It says there was a large town or city. That was there until destruction came. It says probably, and always that word probably, okay? That means they don't know themselves, but it says the ancient metropolis of the stone grave race of Middle Tennessee. It says not less than 3,000 closely laid stone graves were found in the adjacent cemetery, and at least 1,000 more were discovered upon the adjoining farms. Many towns, villages, and settlements were located in the surrounding country, and the smaller cemeteries upon nearly every large farm in this general section established the fact that a widely distributed population once occupied this fertile territory and buried its dead for several generations at least in various local or family burial grounds. Notwithstanding its rough usage, the large central cemetery has proved a valuable treasury of antiquities. Some 600 or 700 perfect specimens of well-burned pottery have been obtained within its limits, many of them unique in form, and so finely finished that they may be said to be semi-glazed. Nearly every familiar natural object, animate and inanimate, is represented in the forms of this ware. Animals, birds, and fish in great variety, the human figure in many attitudes, seashell forms, and grotesque and fanciful figures are all represented, and many of the vessels have been colored and decorated with considerable artistic skill. There are cooking vessels, drinking cups, water jars, hanging vessels, sets of ware, ornamented and plain, basins, bottles, vases, spoons, and indeed every variety of equipment for a well-stocked aboriginal cuisine. That lets you know right there that the people were civilized, because savages usually eat with their hands. It says right here that in Tennessee, the presence of many articles from other sections of the country also indicates that in the prehistoric period, there must have been commercial intercourse or contact with tribes living at a great distance from this ancient town or city. Many of the drinking cups, ornaments, and utensils were made of marine shells from the Gulf or the South Atlantic coast. So I always like to go back and refer to this map where these so-called Civil War battles took place, and this is Tennessee. Nashville in particular is right here somewhere where all these battles took place at over the course of the Civil War years. So it said that in Tennessee there was stuff found that was found at great distances. A lot of the stuff was shells from this Gulf Coast right here, from Florida up and all through here. So it said they were related. So basically you can see why and how all these battles in this area were pretty much connected, because all these tribes that they like to say was warring with each other were actually connected. Most of them spoke the same language and had social ties one to another. It says, notwithstanding the large population that occupied the central city and the adjacent country, no ancient defensive or military works or earthworks of magnitude have been discovered in the immediate vicinity of Nashville. Okay, remember they said that. There is a large artificial mound a half a mile northeast of Noel Cemetery, about 12 feet high, but it does not appear to have been a place of burial or to have been connected with any system of earthworks. Remember in this it says, but it does not appear to. That means they're not sure. It was doubtless used for some public or religious purpose. It may have been a mound of observation or the residence site of some old chieftain. Now remember that it said there was one mound to the north of the regular community. There was one that was 12 feet high that could have been for observation or some old chieftain that was set off to the northeast, it says, of the other mounds. But right here it says a cordon of frontier forts or fortified towns, however, protected this central and thickly settled district. Now they had fortified towns that was for the defense of the whole population. Understand that, what it's saying right here. Up here it said it didn't have any ancient defensive or military or earthworks, but down here it says it had fortified forts or fortified towns, however, protected this central and thickly settled district, and probably enabled its population to live in peace and security for generations. So we got an understanding of where the ancients are buried, or the ancestors' ancestors, right? But what we need to really deal with and focus and narrow in on is the warriors. After all those battles, where did those warriors go? Where did all those bodies get buried? During the Trail of Tears, when they said 4,000 Indians died from smallpox and disease, where did those 4,000 bodies get buried? This is what we need to be looking at, because that is the DNA, that is the Indian DNA that we need. Through the history books, which has all been a lie. So therefore, if it's a lie, then what's the truth? If it's a lie, then what's the